Lord my God, I really have nothing at all for which to pray to you. Even if you would promise to grant my every wish, I really cannot think of anything except that I may remain with you.
And I said, how in the world he was able to do that and control which portions of the statue? It's just, she said it was some of the best work she'd ever seen done. So we are just thrilled. I mean, one guy that looked at it, who's been to Copenhagen, said it's the best statue of Kierkegaard in the world.
Really?
That's what he said. Now, the ones that are in Copenhagen are as a boy or a student. But the old man with the hat, because this was drawn by this H.P. Hansen when he was walking down the streets a year before he died. He'd watch him out the window. And most of the biographers say this is really the best depiction of him. So I tell you, and the sculptor, she's an absolute dream. She is the most interesting person. She's a little bit older than I am, and she's a relief worker. I mean, she goes all over the world when there's disasters too. She'll be gone for months. I mean, when she was working on this, you know, I say, well, where's Rita? Well, she's down in New Orleans. You know? So, I mean, she is a very complicated, diverse person. Plus, she's an absolute maniac about her work. And all of her work has this kind of rough finish. I don't know how do you say that, dimpled or whatever. I like it too. I like it a lot. And the other thing that was wonderful about her was, you know, I said, I really want kind of a realistic depiction. And I showed her this drawing. So here's the drawing.
Oh.
That's what she had to work on. And I said, I'm really not looking for anything that'll be abstract or something. You know, I want, so when they look at it, they'll know it's Kierkegaard. She says, I have no trouble doing that. You know, like a lot of artists, you know, like dogs peeing on a hydrant, you know, they got to make their mark. She said, my mark will be this dimple. Why did he not marry her? He loved her desperately, and she loved him desperately. And after a year, he broke it off, and he knew that she would not accept the termination of the engagement. And so he then kind of made himself ugly to her so that she would want him to be gone. But all the more that he tried to make himself ugly to her, and mostly in his behavior, all the more she loved him. So it broke off. And then when it broke off, he then dedicated all of his writings to her. So it broke off in 41, and then he really started big time writing in 43. And all of his books were dedicated to her. He said that she was his muse. But she was 10 years younger than he was. She was just a young lady, a young girl when he married her, when he was engaged to her. And that, it's hard to imagine that she could be a muse for all these complicated books. And especially, they had a different idea about Christianity. His view of Christianity was much more difficult, filled with suffering, and hers was much more filled with joy and fulfillment. And so, at the end, I was working on this, trying to come up with some idea on why the engagement was ended. And I came upon this passage that I'd heard before, but I never really paid much attention to it, where he talked about falling in love with his pen. And this was after he broke off the engagement. So it was a way of kind of falling in love with his writing. So he just talked about his pen and kind of fixated on it, and talked about how somebody got mad at his pen, throw it away, and other times he would cherish his pen. And sometimes his pen would write down what he had in his mind. Other times it couldn't do it. Sometimes it would write down more than he had in his mind. And he was inspired by his pen. But he said, this is my pen. He said, and I know a lot of you would think it's not a right object for one's affection. So then I said, I want a drawing of this. I want a drawing of this. But I can't draw, you know. So I Googled illustrators, Seattle. And I landed on this Heather Hudson. So I sent her the poem. I sent her my idea, told her about the book, told her when I needed it. And she wrote back and she said, I've never heard of him, but I like this idea. And she said, I will give you 4 possibilities. So she gave me 4 rough sketches on how Regime could be his pen. I gave her a couple of ideas, but they were dorky, you know. So she gave me back 4 selections which to pick, and the one just leaped out at me, and I said, I want number 4, and she said, I'm glad, because that's the one I like the best. So it's in the book. There it is. So look how she did it. So there's the quill, and then she kind of fades behind it. Isn't that interesting? And you can see all the nice curls in her hair, the detail, and then his hand, and then the ink is a broken heart. A splotch of ink is a broken heart. And the hand is probably more muscular than his hand. He probably had a very slight hand, being very slight built. She said, but his writings were muscular. I said, yes, I concede. I just love that. I just think that's great. That's one of my great prizes in the book.
Yeah.
She's going to be here too.
Oh,
She's
good.
going to come on the 17th. He wrote this to his cousin, Julie Thompson. I am actually in love with the company of my pen. He says, I am actually in love with the company of my pen. It might be said that this is a poor object on which to cash one's affections, perhaps, but it is not as though I were always content with it. Occasionally I hurl it away in anger. Alas, this very anger shows me once more that I am indeed in love with it, for the quarrel ends as lovers' quarrels do. I can fight completely in my pen. When I become angry, when it sometimes seems to me that it cannot do what I can do, cannot follow the thought that I am thinking, or whether I am surprised when it seems as if it can do what I cannot tear myself away from the company of my pen. Indeed, it even prevents me from seeking company of anybody else. That's a weird statement, isn't it? Yeah, especially the way it ends. And I say, for a pictorial rendering of this passage, see figure 8. I think that's a great passage.
Yeah.
So anyway, that happens at 9. So that's 9 to 10. And then at 10:30, so we have about a half-hour little hiatus there, and then at 10:30 we start the worship service. So the worship service is going to be straightforward worship service, but the sermon will be based on Kierkegaard's love for Luther's sermons. So I'm going to have one sermon. He loved many of Luther's sermons, so I'm going to be picking one. I haven't picked the one yet I'm going to do. There's about 50 of them in the journals that he focuses on. And then the hymn of the day will be an old Paul Gerhardt hymn, German hymn writer from the 15th century. That it was Kierkegaard's favorite hymn. Commit thy ways confiding. And the hymn has been out of circulation for a long time because Paul Gerhardt's hymn, who used to be just sung all over the world in Lutheran churches, is now out of favor because it's a little too conservative. People looking for more open-ended hymns these days. So I found a friend of mine in Chicago, he's 84 now, who's a great Lutheran hymn writer of tunes. And I told him about this project, and I found a tune that we could use for it because the meter was the same. He said, oh no, Ron, no, you need a new tune. So Carl Schalk has written a new tune, so we'll be singing that as the hymn of the day. And then for distribution music, there's going to be the world premiere of a Kierkegaardian fugue. I took 2 pages out of Christian Discourses of the dialectic between the certainty of Christian message and the uncertainty of our appropriation of it. So the message is very clear, Kierkegaard thought, but the way we live it out is messy. And so he weaves this together, back and forth, through these 2 pages. That it's certain, but it's not. It's uncertain, but it's certain. Back and forth in this complicated way. So I had a friend in New York City at Bard College who was very interested in Kierkegaard and wrote some instrumental music based on Kierkegaard. So I sent it to him. He said, no, I'm not interested. It's too religious. I don't like the religious part of Kierkegaard. I like the aesthetic part. I said, oh, shoot, because that guy he's really good. So I was complaining to my second daughter, who's a cellist, about this. She said, well, Dad, send it to Josh, my friend from Garfield. You know, the jazz musician who lives in New York City now. I said, I remember. I remember Josh, but I don't think he'd be interested in this. He's kind of a lapsed Jew, and he's, very secular-minded. She said, oh, no, Dad. I think Josh will love it. Send it to him. So I sent it to him, and he went over the moon. And I said, I'm looking for a fugue. And I don't really care what the idiom is. And he said, maybe it'll be a little jazz, a little classical music. And he said, I'll do it for cello and tenor voice, which just so happens my daughter's the cellist, and her fiance's the tenor. So they're going to be here, and they're going to sing this 5-minute piece. And I told Josh at the time, I said, there's too many words here. You're not going to be able to use them all. It's too short of a piece. So he finished it, and he said, I used every word. How could you leave out a word? And so he gave me a piano reduction on digitized music, so I could hear what it sounds like. Of course, it's not cello, and it's not the tenor voice. It's unbelievable. So anyway, that's going to be sung and played for, I think, the offertory. And then at the communion distribution of music, the choir is going to sing a piece that Carl Schock also did for me some years ago on my 25th ordination anniversary, where we took an old William Cowper poem that I dearly love. And Cowper, he's one of these B-class English poets, that's drowned out by Wordsworth and all the famous ones. But I like William Cowper very much. And it's called Thankless for Favors from on High. Man thinks he fades too soon, though 'tis his privilege to die. Would he improve the boon? That's how it opens. I think it's just a great poem. It's an 8-verse poem. And Carl set that for a congregational hymn. And then a year later, he set it for anthem for choir. And so the choir is going to sing that piece. So that'll be the communion distribution music. And then at the end of the worship service, we're going to come out. So the church is right there. We're going to come right out the door. We're all going to come in here, stand around here, and we're going to dedicate the statue. So I'm going to read a Bible verse, say a prayer, and then I'm going to read an homage that has been written, a poetic homage to Kierkegaard by Dana Gioia. So he's a friend that this all just fell into place very strangely, and he wrote this poem in a fury. He said, it usually takes me months and months and months to write, but he wrote this poem in a weekend. And it was so weird. He was flying out to Washington, D.C. to do a commencement address in May, and he took the new Garth biography with him, read the whole thing, 700 pages, on the way out and way back. When he got home, he sat down and he wrote it. So I'm going to read that.
We heard him at Seattle Pacific.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I've never met him. I talked to him on the phone once. Otherwise, it's all been email.
I knew that name was familiar.
Mm-hmm.
I was so hoping he could be here, but he can't be here. So anyway, we're going to read that, and that'll be the end of the dedication. And then we go downstairs, and we have so that'll be about 12. And then we have the Nordiska dancers in Danish costume doing old Danish folk song dances. And we've had them here before. They're very good. And that'll go on for about 15, 20 minutes. And then we have krumzakaka. It's being made by a friend of mine. The king's cake, the rings, flags, and krumkaka. So my family and I love to make krumkaka, so we're going to make a whole bunch of krumkaka. And then we've made a commemorative mug, glass commemorative mug, with Kierkegaard's face on it from a 1955 Danish stamp. And then with the details of the commemoration on the other side. And those will all be free to people. So get your krumzakaka, have a krumkaka, have a cup of coffee in your mug. That's yours to take home as a memento. And then I'll be down there signing my book, and there'll be crowds of people there wanting me to sign my book. Yes, and we'll have piles of books, and they'll all be sold. So anyway, we're doing that. And then there was a write-up on our event in the Lutheran Forum with a picture of the statue on the cover. And so we got a whole bunch of those that you can have one for free to take with you, the Reformation issue of the Lutheran Forum journal. And I have a little essay in there. There's a couple other essays in there on Kierkegaard. And then one of Dana Gioia's friends from, Dana Gioia is Roman Catholic, but he has this close friend who's a Lutheran in Pennsylvania. And he said, I thought it'd be nice if he could do something. So he's doing a broadsheet of the poem.
Oh.
So there's going to be 50 of those downstairs selling for $25 a piece, and that money will go to the food bank. It's a food bank, it's raising money for the food bank. So those will be there as well. So that'll be, and I imagine it'll be over maybe by 1.
Okay.
And then one of the unpredictable things is this Samuel Ogandi from Nigeria. Samuel Ogandi is a Presbyterian minister who heard about the commemoration in Nigeria, because I posted it on the Copenhagen webpage for events happening throughout the world for the bi-centennial. And he said it's the best offering in the world on the bi-centennial of Kierkegaard. Everything else are these academic conferences with scholars. He said this is done in the church. That's where his bicentennial should be remembered. It's in church. And he said, so I want to come. So he said, I am the foremost translator of Kierkegaard on the African continent. And I want to come. I said, well, great. So I don't know if he's coming. So he may be here. And if Samuel comes, I don't know what he's like. I don't know if he's a diminutive or if he's larger than life. Is he an extrovert or an introvert? If he's larger than life and he's an extrovert, we'll have to deal with Samuel. I don't know. But he's not scheduled to do anything, you know. But he said he just wanted to be here. He said, I want to be a fly on the wall. I want to see this. So I can't believe it's happening. So he claims he's coming. And he claims he got money for it from some foundation in Africa for the Presbyterian Church to pay for his whole trip out and back.
Fantastic.
So I don't know, he may or may not be here. I would guess if he were coming, I would have heard, but who knows? And then there's another couple sweet things that are going to happen I'm very happy about. Of course, Rita will be here. Heather will be here. Never met Heather, the illustrator. So excited to have a chance to meet her. Of course, my daughter will be, she lives in Indianapolis, and she'll be singing this piece of music, so it'd be so nice to see her and her fiance. We adore them both. And then one of my friends from PLU, George Arbaugh, who died about 10 years ago, he was an international Kierkegaard scholar. And he encouraged me before the book even was formulated to do this book, Kierkegaard for the Church. And George was going to write the foreword to it. So I was so excited about it. But anyway, he died in 2003. But his widow will be here. I'm hoping she will be here, Donna. So it'd be great if Donna Arbaugh is actually able to make it. So George is one of the people that the book was dedicated to. In memory of. So here are the people. These are all important people in my life. So there's George Arbaugh right there. I miss him a lot. And he spoke, I guess it was 2002 that he died. He spoke here at one of our Kierkegaard festivals back in the middle 80s. And there are people in our congregation who had him as a teacher at PLU. He taught at PLU for years. And then, of course, there's Howard and Edna Hong. Been so wonderful if they could have been here. And then Martin Heineken, oh, what a dear. He also spoke here. I have a piece at the end where I call Kierkegaard's father of my faith. And Martin said to me one time, he said, I knew you and I had something in common, because he's my father too. And when I knew Martin, he was in his 90s. It's kind of interesting to be a sibling with a 90-year-old. He was the greatest guy. I just admired him so. I miss him a lot. He and his wife Vera they retired in where Dartmouth is in Vermont. And every winter they'd be out ice skating on the pond together, and all the people of the town would come and watch these two old fogies out there ice skating together. I guess it was a sight for sore eyes. And one of the great stories about Martin Heineken is after Vera died, he lived for about 5 years. And I remember I used to talk to him on the phone a lot. And about 3 years after she died, I talked to him, and he said, guess what, Ron? I said, what? He said, I've got a girlfriend. I said, Martin, who's your girlfriend? So he told me about her. And I said, well, where does she live? He said, she lives in Chicago. And I said, do you ever see her? No. I said, and she's your girlfriend? Yes, she is. I said, well, how's she your girlfriend? So we talk on the phone all the time. I said, so how do you have a relationship with this new girlfriend? He said, she reminds me when I talk to her how a woman can see the world, and that's what I miss not having my wife. And now I have her, and she reminds me how women look at things, and I need that desperately. And so I have these conversations with her, and I'm always rejuvenated. Thing to say, I would ask that the Lord give me a voice to say this one thing, and that is, Kierkegaard, Jesus was a nobody. Remember that, Christendom. Amen. Say it of his prayer.
Yeah, I read that.
You know that great?
I brought you a song.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, let's start with a prayer. And I don't know where you would go. Would you start with one of those 3 little prayers?
You could do that, or you could do any of them in there, really. I mean, any one that you particularly liked.
Yeah. Well, I would ask that Kierkegaard step forward and help me get out of the way here.
Yeah, right.
So that would be mine.
Yeah, isn't
That would be.
So, the one about him stepping forward so you get out of the way,
That was just me.
that was just you. Well, I mean, all 3 of these are wonderful, you know, and I say any day you need to have all 3 of these.
So why don't we start with that first one?
Okay. Father in heaven, we call upon your Spirit to bring courage and life and power and strength, but might it first of all make us sober.
So,
Amen.
Why do we want to be sober?
Yeah, you know, and he flips sobriety.
With intoxication.
Yeah. It's the opposite of what you'd think it would be. You would think that sobriety would be a certain calmness in life, right? And intoxication is a wildness in life. But he said it's the other way around.
That's the way I experience it. Yeah, that's the truth of it.
So what you want to be freed of is a kind of a blasé, laissez-faire life, and have this burning, yearning to walk with God, to have a life with God. And that's the sobriety. That's what it is you're waking up to. So it's really quite remarkable the way he understands that. And that's in that last book on Judge for Yourself and for Self-Examination, the last published books of his, where he talks about the need to sober up, which is really to liven up. Sobering up is livening up. Sobering up isn't becoming dull. So he really turns that word. It's easy to miss it. He does a lot of that. Didn't seem to care. And if I'd been his editor, I'd have said, Soren, you know, I think you have to put a flag on this, or you have to highlight that, or you have to, you know, give a warning. No, he wouldn't want to do that. And, you know, that's the burden of my first article on Kierkegaard's complex way to simplicity. That he believed that his writings had to be as difficult as the Christian life itself is. If you write a smooth book,
That's beautiful.
yeah, if you write a smooth book about Christianity, you
Yeah.
misrepresent
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
if there's parts about in my writing that confuse you and confound you, well, good. I'm
Yeah.
glad, because I'm writing about a life that is confusing and confounding in many ways.
Yeah. Jody says every poem must step up to the abyss in order to validate its credibility.
Yeah,
From Gene Burden's Life of Poetry.
yeah, that's good. That's what he
Yeah.
does. He steps up to the abyss. It was like your nice little poem that I used in the book, you know, about we have to be ready to die before Christianity starts.
Yeah.
That's like being at the abyss, you know, as well. So I like his sense of sobriety. Sense
I
of
do too.
sobriety is different than you would normally think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's intoxicating for him that we have to get rid of is probability. He disdained probability. Now, that's such an abstract category, a lot of people miss it. But that's really looking for safety in life. If you always play the probabilities, and you're always on the side of safety, then that's what's deadening. And that is what's intoxicating. You get completely addicted to probabilities. And then you no longer take any risks. And for him, the Christian life was a risk. He famously talked about venturing out of 40,000 fathoms of water, venturing out over 40,000 fathoms of water. That's the Christian life. Christian life is not all settled. And it's a confusing thing, you know, because there's a lot in Christianity that is settled. Christ died on the cross, said it's finished. But that's just the beginning for you and for me. What are you going to do with this crucified one? That's why I like that passage so much. That's my favorite passage from Kierkegaard. That I will, it's on the statue, that I will seek my refuge with the crucified one to save me from myself. There you have it. There's the trauma. There's the difficulty. There's the risk-taking.
Then the self-forgetfulness.
And the self-forgetfulness. All of that's in there. He was a student of the self. He knew all of our tricks. He knew all of our dodges. He knew how we construct a life to avoid life. And he could write about it with great panache. I mean, he had just such great literary sensitivity to all those traps, all those tricks, all those dodges. And he believed that you could only expose them to the educated and the prosperous with irony and humor and sarcasm. And he's full of it. He's full of irony, sarcasm, and humor. And people will read his books and they'll throw him. Damn him! How dare he poke me like that, you know? And Kierkegaard would say, well, if I'm not going to do it, nobody is. And if we're going to leave you in your malaise, then there's no love. So the only loving thing to do is give you a bad time.
The humor get you in trouble?
Oh, yeah. Humor, sarcasm, the irony, the kind of the recklessness. I mean, he's got, I just love that passage about, when I read that, I'll never forget where I was. I was on the plane. I was on the plane coming back from visiting with Howard and Edna Hong in St. Olaf. And the book had just come out, 18 Edifying, Upbuilding Discourses. And he gave me a copy of it, wrote a nice description to it. And so I was reading it on the way home on the plane. It's a big book. And I remember Heidegger, of all people, loved that book. I thought, well, it can't be very good if Martin Heidegger liked it, you know. And so I'm reading along, and there Kierkegaard says, what is the apostolic voice like? What is the voice like that tells about Christ Jesus? What is it like? He says, like a woman in childbirth, screaming, kicking, yelling, ardent, fervent, disjointed, broken. I read that passage, and I just about jumped out of my seat. Of course, that's what it is. That's what the mess is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to disrupt you. So the form has to be disrupting. So if you preach a sermon that is an erudite essay read from the pulpit, you miss the form. The form has to be crying, yelling, incomplete sentences. And even though he never read the passage in Luther, as far as I know, Luther has something very similar, where he talks about the preaching moment being like yelling across the bar room and throwing a stool. Hey, watch out, what are you doing over there? Get over here! See, that's preaching. Yelling in a bar room. Well, you know, I mean, especially in our tradition of Lutheranism, we have, unfortunately, a very sad tradition about this sedate sermon that's read with no life in it. You know, there's no viva vox, no living voice. And if the living voice means that yelling like in a bar room, and Kierkegaard's a woman in childbirth, you know, that's what's really missed in the church today. So no wonder there are people, as Kierkegaard says, nicely put, I think, even a little risky, that the ministers have all performed spiritual abortions on their congregation. And that's what we've got, I think. We've got a lot of dead souls. And it's because they've just never been given the word of life. And so Kierkegaard knew it, Luther knew it. Luther, they said there were people who wrote about what it was like to hear Luther preach. And he would go in, you know, all of his sermons are written out. They're essays, you can read them. He never read a sermon in the pulpit. He wrote them down after he preached them, or students did from memory and notes. Luther would go in the sermon with one word. So he knew what he's supposed to be talking about. They were concept sermons, he called them. And they said he was divine chaos in the pulpit. He was a tornado. And that, I remember when I first read that in Fred Moiser's book on Luther the Preacher, I said, wow, was I ever misled by all of those recorded sermons that are anything but that? Too bad we didn't have videographers in the 16th century. Wouldn't that have been great to have had a video of Luther preaching?
We would have done the same thing. I mean,
Probably. Winter's classic, the suburban captivity of the churches. That's what we're suffering from. And Kierkegaard can cure us from the suburban captivity of the churches. That Gibson Winter book is a classic, and
I don't know that book.
Yeah, and 1961, and he was an ethicist at the University of Chicago, and it's a brilliant book, and he never mentions Kierkegaard's name in it. It could have all been about Kierkegaard. So the church needs help, and it needs help to get free of its suburban captivity. And it's a play on Luther's treatise from 1520, one of his great treatises, The Babylonian Captivity of the Churches. So Gibson Winter plays on that title, called The Suburban Captivity of the Churches. It's just great. And Christianity becomes a club. It becomes like a flower club, a social club. And it's not a place where, one person one time told me after they visited the church once, he said, I'm never going in that room again. I remember he came for a coffee hour. He said, I was there last Sunday, I'll never go in that room again. And I said, why won't you ever go in that room? He said, because it's an operating room. And I'm never going in there again.
And
so I'm
I'm not laughing at